Thanks, Amanda, and all of that is to enable me to welcome our next speaker. I'm very privileged to be able to introduce to deliver the plenary address the Honourable Tanya Plibersek, Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Development. Tanya Plibersek was first elected to the Australian Parliament in 1998 and has been a member of the House of Representatives for 16 years. A testament to her patience and fortitude. She's well known in Australia through her journalistic endeavours and her frequent appearances on Q&A. She holds a degree in communications and a master's in public policy and politics. Throughout her career, she's worked in areas of significant importance to civil society, including in the Office for the Status and Advancement of Women, and as Minister and Shadow Minister held portfolios in the areas of work, family and community, in youth and early childhood education, in housing, in human services, and as Minister for Social Inclusion, and more recently as Minister for Health and Medical Research. She's been a strong advocate for the idea that members of civil society working together can achieve positive change. She has been responsible for progressive policies and championed issues in the areas of work rights, social housing, homelessness, and the prevention of discrimination against women and violence against women. She became Deputy Leader of the Opposition in the Australian Parliament last year. Could you please welcome the Honourable Tanya Plibersek?
Thank you, Ralph, and for that introduction. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today and to pay my respects to their elders past and present. I think we had a welcome to country from Auntie Di, but I believe she's not with us any longer, so thanks to her for that welcome to country. Thank you also to Glyn Davis for hosting this event today, to my friend Tim Costello and to Joanne Yates, who's working so effectively with Tim to bring together all of you at this conference today. Our MC, Amanda Robbins, I know who'll be making an excellent contribution here as she has in her professional roles in the past. Many distinguished guests, including the South African High Commissioner and the US Consul General, steering committee members, and so many friends in the audience. It's wonderful to have you here today. Many of you I know from a number of different portfolios I've held in the past, but I'm also delighted to know that we've got almost 1 in 5 of the audience as international visitors. Welcome to Australia. I mean, you would have had a better time if we were in Sydney, of course, but nevertheless, Melbourne is a very lovely place. Welcome to our international guests. It's terrific to have an opportunity to address you here today. The C20 has a very specific mandate to refine and endorse specific policy issues and solutions that you want to see considered by the G20 meeting in Brisbane later this year. This is not the way that the civil society voice has been always heard in the lead up to G20 meetings. In fact, many of you would remember scenes of very strong protest and violence in years past. And I just wanted to say to you how great I think it is that all of you have come together in this way to make your contributions in a thoughtful and structured way. Being part of the conversation, having the opportunity to influence the debate later in the year in Brisbane, I think is a terrific opportunity. But I also think that you still have a responsibility to not just work here in the room talking to each other, but to activate all of your networks and all of your opportunities to try and influence the debate. I believe that there was a protest here this morning, and I certainly support the right to demonstrate. I don't support ugly or violent demonstrations, obviously, but the civil society voice has to be heard in many fora, and so I'm pleased that this is one forum that you're able to use, but that you'll use the other fora available to you as well. I wanted to give you just a very brief history. I'm sure many of you know that the G20 started in 1999 after the Asian financial crisis as a meeting of finance ministers and central bank governors in Berlin, but really didn't come into its own until 2008, faced with the global financial crisis. The creation of the G20's Leaders Summit was vital in addressing and offsetting the worst impacts of the GFC by coordinating a response to the economic meltdown that was really potentially on the verge of seeing the whole global economy go into meltdown. Of course, many countries, many communities, many people still suffered terribly during the global financial crisis, losing jobs, losing income. But the ability for countries to coordinate their action, to work together, actually did mitigate some of the worst of the crisis. And I have to pay tribute to Kevin Rudd here. Kevin Rudd was absolutely relentless, and those of you who have worked with him know that he can be absolutely relentless in bringing world leaders together and saying the G8 is not a big enough forum for us to address this crisis. It has to have more buy-in from more countries. And he had to personally convince a number of leaders to be involved in the G20. And so his persistence in driving broader and deeper dialogue and consensus through the G20 was rewarded. That G20 arrangement played a key role in rebuilding confidence after the worst global meltdown of economies around the world in more than 80 years. So the reason I wanted to give a little bit of a historic context is the reason that the G20 was given this shot in the arm was because world leaders realised that there are some problems that are too big for any one country on its own to face. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that today, because the G20 focus, of course, during that time from 2008 onwards has been on the global economy and seeing strong economic growth. But if you're talking about the issues that face us as a world, of course, having strong economies and sustainable economic growth, that's one of the key issues that faces us as a human community. But there are other issues that face us, really challenge us right now, that are likewise too big for any one country to face on their own. And I want to talk to you about some of those today. You have identified them in your key areas: inclusive growth and employment, infrastructure, climate change and sustainability, and governance, the four areas that you've identified as areas to focus on. I'd say, not that I want to divert you from your tight focus, but I would add that the recent events that we've been watching over the last week, and certainly over recent months and years in the Middle East, also remind us that global cooperation is absolutely vital when we're talking about the sort of humanitarian crises that we're seeing in Iraq at the moment and in Syria in recent times too. Hundreds of thousands in the last week displaced by war, millions displaced over the last couple of years too. But I'll stick mostly to the four themes that you've developed. Inclusive growth and employment. I think that this is one of the absolutely core responsibilities, beliefs and drivers of, I don't want to be partisan here, but our side of politics. Strong economy, fair society. Two things have to go together. There's no good having just economic growth at all costs on its own. It has to deliver for the citizens of the country and of the globe that you're talking about. Those two things have to work in partnership. And so I think the topic you've chosen of inclusive growth and employment is a very important one. You reflect a little bit on the Millennium Development Goals now, and I know I've read in your papers some of the criticisms of the fact that there has been progress on the Millennium Development Goals, but inequality is continuing as something that we need to address in the world. And there is, I think, quite rightly, a focus on inequality in the work that you've been doing, and that should continue. But I don't think anyone should, for a moment, discount how revolutionary and how important it was to set Millennium Development Goals, to focus attention. I can tell you, as someone in the practice of governing, unless you have goals and targets that people will measure you against, things very easily slip down the list of priorities. It is so important to have a set of clear goals. And the 2015 is fast creeping up on us, and the question of whether we'll meet all the Millennium Development Goals, I think we know we probably won't meet all of them. But I don't think progress would have been as good as it's been in the areas where we've seen progress without these specifically articulated goals. If you look at some of the goals that we're closer to reaching, the proportion of people living in extreme poverty. In 1990, almost 1 in 2 people in the world lived in extreme poverty, 47%. By 2010, that's more like 1 in 5, 22%. Now, if you asked anyone, is it okay that 1 in 5 human beings live in extreme poverty? Plainly, the answer is no. It's not okay that 1 in 5 human beings live in extreme poverty. If we didn't have a Millennium Development Goal on extreme poverty, would we have achieved in the same time that change between 1 in 2 and 1 in 5? I don't think so. Malaria, tuberculosis, malaria mortality down by 25% in just 10 years between 2000 and 2010. Slum dwellers, 200 million people provided with better water, sanitation and housing in just 10 years, about double the target. 100 million target, about double that achieved. So I think it's so important for us always to reach higher, try harder, work for more. But one of our failings sometimes as people on the progressive side of politics, I'm speaking for myself now, is that we don't really stop and smell the flowers. We don't acknowledge often enough the achievements of people working together towards a defined target. You also talked about infrastructure and going beyond physical infrastructure like transport into social infrastructure as well. Of course, I think that's a terrific way of looking at the taxpayers' funds that governments invest on behalf of their citizens. I was delighted in driving in here today to see the Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre, which we turned the sod on when I was Health Minister, and come past the Common Ground homeless service. That's something that we did when I was Housing Minister. And there's actually nothing more rewarding as an elected representative than seeing the physical manifestation of the investments that you make when you say that health is a priority for us, homelessness is a priority for us. And I think when you go back to the idea of why do we want a strong economy, so we can have a fair society, it's natural then that you think of infrastructure investment for the social benefits that it provides, not just for the kilometres of roads laid. Climate change and sustainability. Those of you who are international visitors might be a little perplexed by the debate in Australia at the moment. If those of you who are international visitors, I'd like to just put on the record that I believe climate change is happening and that human beings are causing it. I know it might sound odd to have to say that. Look, I think there is phenomenal movement in this area at the moment, and the two really big things that are changing are the announcement that President Obama made about coal-fired power generation recently, and what's happening in China. China's going from 6 localised ETS, emissions trading schemes in different cities, trial schemes. They believe they'll have a national emissions trading scheme in the next few years. They're very committed to reducing their reliance on carbon heavy sources of power and increasing their share of renewables in their energy mix. They say they want to reach peak carbon soon and then be on the way down. And these are in both camps, and there's been a very important statement from the Europeans as well recently. So you actually have, in the lead up to the Paris conference next year, some of the largest players that were perhaps a little unwilling to engage in Copenhagen, looking like they are much more willing to engage in the lead up to Paris. That is amazing, terrific, great opportunity, missed opportunity for Australia. The Chinese said that they were hoping one day to link with the Australian emissions trading scheme. Well, that won't be happening. But it's I'm not sure that I can endorse the specifics of your proposals, but this is an absolutely critical area for us to act together on as a globe. And that's really, I think, one of the great challenges, but one of the great opportunities in the next couple of years. And governance. You can't do any of the things that you want to do as a government without collecting taxes to do it. The question of how you collect those taxes is critical to both economic growth and fairness. You want to have a tax system that encourages businesses to employ and invest, but you want to have a tax system that is progressive, that puts the smallest burden on the poorest and a greater burden on those who can afford to pay more. These things seem self-evident, but unfortunately tax systems are complex systems, and in some ways they grow organically and get bits bolted on along the way. It is absolutely critical for people who are asking governments to spend money to also have an ability to say, this is how you should raise it fairly. And I think one of the areas that I hope that you will have in common with the G20, the finance ministers and leaders, is the issue of large companies shifting tax between jurisdiction to minimise their tax burden. It's not good for anyone to allow that to happen. It's not good for the countries that are missing out on revenue, and frankly it's not good for most businesses either, because they're competing against businesses that are paying little or no tax. And I just want to finish on your topics by saying one additional thing in this area of governance. Transparency and anti-corruption measures are absolutely critical to reducing poverty. As the people who suffer most when there is corruption are the poorest people. They are the ones least able to pay to have their children go to the school that's supposed to be free, least able to pay for the, one country I visited recently, the marriage licence that's supposed to cost, $5, when you add the bribes in, costs $50. So a lot of people don't get married. Well, some people would say, who cares if they don't get married? What that means is that children get no child support if their fathers leave. So those issues that seem like very small issues of corruption have the largest impact on the poorest people. So I hope that you will also do very good work in this area. I want to talk just briefly about some of the challenges that I see for civil society, not not necessarily in the lead up to this G20 in particular, but as movements, I think that it's very easy to see very good work and very great effort dissipated by too broad a focus on too many things. It's very difficult to get agreement from a group as diverse as this about what your priorities should be, about what your specific ask should be going into the G20 meeting. But I can tell you that at the G20 meeting, there'll be a finite time for you to make your pitch. There'll be a finite attention span from the people you're pitching to. And the bigger and broader and more diffuse your ask, the harder it'll be to get any of it. So however difficult it is to sharpen and direct your focus, it will be really critical to the success, to your ability to achieve anything. I also, well, you probably expect me to say this, and you'll probably mark me down for it, but I'm going to make a pitch for pragmatism as well. There'll be many of you who you wouldn't be in this room if you weren't an idealistic person. You wouldn't be in this room if you weren't prepared to make personal sacrifice and fight all the odds for your idealistic, pure position on the thing that you care most about. And I admire that so much in you as individuals and as a human character. You know, full marks. As a way of achieving something at the G20, you're going to have to focus and compromise. And so please think about not just refining your ask, but making it an achievable ask. Or at least if you're going to set the headline goal of where you want to be in an ideal world, break it into achievable steps so that legislators can actually at least give you some of what you're asking for. I also wanted to say one last thing about advocacy. And I don't want to be patronising or teach anyone to suck eggs. I know you all know about this, but legislators respond to what their constituents are asking of them. And you might have the best and purest and most well thought through ask in the world. If people's constituencies aren't making a demand of legislators for that thing, your chances of achieving it are much, much less. So what happens in this room is absolutely critical. But I go back to the point that I started with. The social activism, the campaigns that you run, the conversations you have with people who are unconvinced are just as important in achieving the goals that you set. I know that many of you are experienced first-rate campaigners, and I don't for a minute want to suggest that I can tell you how to do your jobs. You know how to do it. I'm just making a plea for you to make sure that that's part of the mix of your focus over the next few months. I've got to say, for example, here in Australia, we've just seen the single biggest cut in our most recent federal budget is a $7.6 billion cut in foreign aid. And the surprising thing about it is that government members are boasting about it in the Parliament. They're claiming it as a win and as a good thing, as a victory, as a sensible save. Whether they get away with that or persist in that, it doesn't depend on me. I've said it's terrible. It actually depends on their constituents, the people that they represent, saying to their elected members that it's a terrible thing. So I've given you a quick round of what I hope to see as the outcomes of your work over the next few months. I want to thank all of you for making the effort to be here. It is a terrific opportunity for influencing the outcome of one of the most important global meetings that we have. And I know that you are grasping the opportunity with both hands. I hope that all of your work is rewarded in the way that it should be. Thank you.